Welcome, friends. Today's video is something a little different than what I normally do on the channel. I've been wanting to make a hobby video for a while, and so that is what this one will be. This one is partially inspired by a channel called Atmoseeker. He does some really cool, immersive tabletop terrain for D&D and things like that. But what sparked this video idea is he put out a diorama contest called the Crypt of Bones, Fogtober, if you will. Here is the little fluff piece that he wrote for it, the prompt. Morlock, the necromancer, has unleashed an undead mist that veils his crypt. Dreaded bone pits, skeleton minions, and deadly traps protect his source of immortality. What horrors must the heroes endure to purge the depths of this evil? Yeah, so that sounds really neat. Undead mist plus skeletal elements must be present. So this sounded like a really fun adventure and a good excuse to make a fun hobby video. So I started planning it all out, and what you are about to watch will be the journey, and at the very end there will be a reveal. And yeah, I hope you will enjoy this and get some hobby inspiration from it. The first step was finding some good spooky, undead, bone type of enemies for our heroes to face off with in this encounter. I didn't have any that really fit in my collection, and so I went to the game store and I found a couple good ones. First, I found some D&D Encounters miniatures, just two skeleton bone boys. One I really liked the look of because he was holding out his sword in a menacing type of pose. The other one has a flail, and I didn't really love his sculpt that much, but, you know, he's a disposable minion, why not? The other I really liked was a Reaper Bones miniature called the Graveyard Golem. I always like golems, and this one is especially perfect for a Halloween, October-themed competition. Next, I took them outside to spray paint them. I used a dark green on the skeleton boys because a lot of their cloth was going to be a green color, and I used a English uniform, kind of like brown khaki color for the golem, and I was ready to get into painting. So I broke out an AK Sky Gray and an AK Dark Sand, and I put those on my palette, and I mixed those together. The ratio is not super important if you're following along, just, do whatever you think looks right. And then we're gonna dry brush that all over the golem. For those who are unfamiliar, dry brushing is a technique where you get most of the paint off of the brush and then you brush it over the model, so you're kind of just dusting the high points. After that, I got out a camouflage green and I kind of just dry brushed all over the spooky skeletons. And after this phase, they were not looking that great. Bear with me, folks. It'll come together, I promise. Next, I go back to that sand color and I just pick out all of the bone elements on the minis. After that, I grab an ivory color and I paint the hair, and I also put some little dots into the eye sockets of the golem. After that's all done, I move on to the silver metallics. Also add some AK bronze metallic and just poke out a couple points. While I'm doing this, I take an acrylic black and paint the bases, paint a little bit of a pattern on the shield of the grunt skeleton. And then we get into the fun part. I grab some mineral spirits and a umber brown oil paint, and I mix up an oil wash. You might be asking, why use an oil wash in this case? Why not just use Nuln oil, like a GW or an army painter? Well, that's because I am cheap and it's really easy to cover things and make a lot of this oil wash. And then the miniatures were ready. And so we can just put them to the side and we will save them for later. The hero miniatures were just some random ones that I had laying around that we'll use, so you'll see those in the reveal. It's a Lord of the Rings elf and a Lord of the Rings hobbit because they just seem like fitting heroes to go on this D&D style adventure. Next, we get into the fun part, which is the main terrain piece, the centerpiece, if you will, for this diorama. And so I brought my friend Rob into the fold, because he has a lot of knowledge about different STLs and terrain files and 3D printing. And so we started spitballing a little bit on some ideas for what might be a cool piece for this. And so he sent me a few the files that he had from, I think, one-page rules. And I really was drawn to this big, like, giant demonic skull, like, entrance, where I like to imagine that maybe the crypt is through the mouth of this giant skeleton. Here's a cool time lapse that his printer captured, which I think is really neat to watch, like 10 or 15 hours just fly by and this thing come to life. So next I get into priming this terrain piece, and I just had this matte gray kind of spray paint that I used. Generally when priming miniatures, as you probably know, you want to go really thin as to not obscure any details, but what I found is that when priming PLA, like plastic 3D printed terrain, it can have these like layer lines, as a result of the way that it's printed. And so I tend to go really thick on the priming. And so that's what I did. In this case, I did 2 thick coats of primer, Don't Tell Duncan Rhodes, and then we get into the painting. So the first thing I do is grab my metal paint and do the silver elements, like these big chains. After that, I grab a medium sand and a old rust to start doing the base coat for all of the skull bits and bone bits. And my thought process on this was to start with the darker rust, but to paint it on kind of thick, again, to be obscuring whatever's left of those those layer lines, but also to try to just do like some like messy wet blending on this, because I tend to try to avoid washes on 3D prints as much as possible because it can kind of accentuate those layer lines. So my thought process is to do a lot of wet blending and avoid using washes as much as possible on this. And so I'm starting with that deep dark brown rust color and mixing in the lighter bone and just kind of working that color up until I'm happy with it. Initially, I actually went much too dark, and then I came in after it dried and just brightened it up a lot more. Looks like I forgot to voice over this spot, so the sound quality is going to be worse on this. This is where I go in and I take some gray and I just dry brush on the stones. After that, I reach for that AK bronze again, and I just pick out any of these metal bits that I think might look neat in bronze. Here I think you're going to see me going in and brightening up the bone because I still thought it was too dark, so that's what I'm doing here, is just bringing it up. And I did some detailing on the teeth. The detail was a little bit weak, so I just sort of like freehand painted them in there, and I think at a distance that really does a good job at making it look like they're individual teeth instead of just like a mush mouth. I also realized that I have no idea what a mush mouth is, but I'm gonna keep it in the video. Okay, so then I know I said I wasn't gonna do washes, but I am gonna do a little bit of wash because I think that it looks good on the metal. Okay, and then here is the golden nugget secret tip that you might not be familiar with, and you might be like, what the heck, why is he holding up Army Painter Quick Shade Purple Tone? That's a weird choice. Well, I find that sometimes using interesting colored washes like purple or blue or green can look really neat on metallics, especially bronze or gold. And so I'm going to cover all of those bronze pieces with this purple tone. So it was at this point that I realized, hey, I've got a baggie full of little tombstones that my friend Mike printed me a while ago. I hadn't quite done anything with. Maybe it would be fun for this October challenge to add some little graveyard pieces. And so I found some MDF wooden pieces that I had, and I glued these 3D printed tombstones to them. After that, I grabbed a Tupperware full of a sand mixture that I had and some plain PVA school glue, and I get ready to do the texturing. So at this point, I break out my special universal remote from the Adam Sandler film Click, and I hit fast forward, and I start going really, really, really fast, where I'm putting PVA glue down and then brushing it how I kind of want it to look. Then I try to dip the giant skull piece into the sand container and realize that it's too big to fit, so that's fun. And so then I just start kind of using my hand to drop sand all over it. And then, knock all of the excess back into the container in a really tidy way, where I absolutely did not get sand all over my desk. I promise. And after this dries, I go ahead and grab that camouflage green again, and I slather that all over the tombstones. I thought this was kind of a weird choice to use the green, but I wanted to do something a little bit different from the gray so that maybe it stands out a little bit against the stone of the main piece. And I think it comes together neat, so just watch and you will see how that works. Then I grab that old rust paint again, and I water it down a good amount, and I just start slathering it all over that sand mixture as a base coat for that ground. No idea why I shake this paint so quickly without letting you see it, but it is a gray color again, and I mix that into my green, and then I dry brush that over the green. And here you have kind of what it looks like. I think it was a good choice to mix in, not just make it plain gray for the tombstones. I think the green was kind of a fun, subtle texture, or subtle hue. All right, and then I add some medium sand back into that old rust, and then I use that color to dry brush all over that dirt, mud kind of ground texture. While I'm at this, I decide, hey, maybe I should make the basing match on these enemies so that it all kind of ties together. So that's what I do here. And in the middle of all of this process, I picked up this Necromancer Reaper Bones miniature to paint and add in, but then I decided that I just didn't like him. I thought his detail was weird, and he had this big mold line I couldn't get rid of going across his face. It probably wouldn't have mattered in the end, but I just decided to scrap him. So, bye-bye, little Necromancer.
Cheers to you, Dice Lab and Dice Lab viewers. This isn't the last you'll see of me.
Next, we get back into the PVA glue, and we start brushing that all over so that we can get into some flock. We're going to use this Woodland Scenics blended turf mixture, and as you can see, this is a massive container that has lasted me for probably close to 10 years now. So shout out Woodland Scenics for making this really cheap product with just massive amount of material. Next, we find a container large enough, and we put the terrain features into that and start coating them in this material and then knocking the excess off. And here we are. I think it's looking pretty spiffy. So I go ahead and do that to our little graveyard sections. You'll notice that I got lazy and got rid of the third graveyard section and just did 2 of them. Pretend you never saw that third one. It never existed. It was just a figment of your imagination. Then I go ahead and decide, hey, maybe I should add a little bit of this grass material to the golem. And so I do that. And when putting the grass material back into the giant tub, I absolutely did not spill it all over my desk. And then this looks actually very suspicious, me putting all of this flock material onto this paper. It looks like I'm rolling up some sort of flock paraphernalia. And here we are. I'm thinking, actually, this adding the flock to the golem was a really neat decision, because I think it adds a lot. It kind of makes him blend in, makes him look like he just popped right up from the earth itself. Almost kind of reminds me of, I think there's a boss in Fable 1 who's like an earth golem. And so, I don't know, but that comes to mind. And now I have just another great idea. I have this Gale Force 9 Autumn blend of like leaf scatter that I never use on anything. And I'm like, hey, this is a Halloween themed diorama competition. Maybe I should add these to it. So I add some more Elmer's glue after everything is dried, and then I drop these leaves all over it. Dun da da da! And here we have our finished pieces. And so I get them all gathered up after everything is dried and laid out on a table, and I put together the diorama. And so that will be coming up next. Let's do a grand reveal. The heroes moved through a maze of moss-covered tombstones, searching for the dreaded Crypt of Bone. Thick morning fog blanketed the graveyard, and through the haze, they spotted it. An ancient portal constructed from the skull of a demon. Dirt, bone, and rock shifted unnaturally around them. They weren't alone.